Away from him, she said it once, no yelling, shaking. Just a young woman standing between six men and the one person on the ground who had nobody else. She held a heavy chain in her hand. Her knuckles were grease-stained, and her voice was steady. The men looked at her like she was a joke. She looked back like she was prepared to be the last thing they ever underestimated. In that parking lot moved. Nobody breathed. Changed. If this is your first time here, welcome to our channel. We tell stories about real courage, loyalty, and the moments that quietly reshape entire lives. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that gas station in Redwood Valley, Arizona, and the 5 seconds that started everything. Lee Walker had grease under her fingernails on the best days and blood on her knuckles on the worst ones. She was 25 years old, and she had been working in her father's garage since she was 9, just handing him tools she barely understood. Then learning the names of every part, learning the sounds, the particular tick of a valve train running dry, the hollow knock of a rod bearing giving up, the soft wheeze of an intake gasket that was lying to everyone about how long it had left. She didn't just fix motorcycles, she listened to them. And they talked back to her in a language nobody had ever bothered to teach her because she had figured it out herself, alone. A shop that still smelled like her father's coffee and his cigarettes and the particular brand of motor oil he had used for 30 years without ever switching. Walker had been gone for 14 months. 14 months since the phone rang at 2 in the morning, and the world rearranged itself into something Emily didn't fully recognize anymore. She hadn't died dramatically. There was no accident, no violent end that would have at least given her something concrete to be angry about. Had simply stopped while he was sitting in his shop chair after closing, the same chair he'd sat in every night for decades, the one with the cracked armrest he always said he'd replace and never did. I just told her it was quick, painless. It said it like that was supposed to be a comfort. And maybe it was, but it didn't do a single thing to fill the silence inside Walker's custom garage the next morning when she showed up. And he wasn't there. Bench, the foreman. She had kept the shop running because it was the only thing left of him that she could hold on to. The truth she told herself. The other truth, the one she kept quieter, was that she had no idea what else to do. Had grown up inside those walls. She had learned everything about machines and almost nothing about the world outside of them. Her father had been her teacher, her business partner, her best friend. Don's one person who never once looked at her like she was too young or too female or too anything to be exactly what she was. One the best mechanic in Redwood Valley, Arizona, by a margin that was not close. The customers didn't see it that way. Not after Thomas was gone. Trickled out over the first few months. With them, she understood old men who had known her father for decades and couldn't bring themselves to watch someone else stand at his workbench. Others left for reasons that felt different, felt deliberate. One of them had mentioned hearing things, a new shop opening up in the next town over. Someone telling them Walker's wasn't what it used to be. Concerns about quality, about reliability, about whether a girl could really handle the heavy work that last more times than she could count. Ignored it the same way she always had by working harder, staying later, and producing results that argued backbeats, without saying a single word. Results didn't pay the electric bill when the customers weren't there to see them. Months before the night at the gas station, Emily had sat down at her father's old desk. She still called it that always would and done the math. Done it slowly and carefully because she was the kind of person who needed to look directly at bad news rather than let it ambush her from the side. The shop had 4 months of operating capital left. 5 if she stretched it. After that, she would have to make decisions she didn't want to make, and some of them she might not be able to unmake. She hadn't told anyone. There was nobody to tell. She had a few acquaintances in town, people she waved it to and exchanged pleasantries with at the diner on Main Street, but not one of them knew the inside of her life the way her father had. She was friendly enough. She just hadn't ever been very good at needing people. And that, too, was something she'd learned from Thomas Walker. He'd been a quiet man, generous and principled and utterly self-contained. He'd built his shop on the belief that the work spoke for itself and that a man or a woman didn't need to explain themselves if they were doing right by the people who came through their door. Had inherited his ethics completely and his business instincts only partially. And she was beginning to wonder if the difference might eventually cost her everything he had built. She was thinking about the numbers again. On Namen, on the night it happened. She had closed the garage at 7, same as every night. She'd cleaned up the workbench, checked the lock on the tool cabinet, then turned off the compressor, and stood in the middle of the shop for a moment the way she sometimes did, just listening to the particular quiet of the place. It was a quiet, done silence. It had texture and memory to it. She could still hear her father in it if she let herself. She didn't let herself too often. It made her chest do things she didn't have time for. The gas station was 4 miles from the garage, halfway between the shop and the small house she rented on the edge of town. Because her truck was running low, and because she was hungry, and the gas station had a decent hot dog situation that she had never admitted to anyone, was pumping gas when she heard the laughter. It wasn't regular laughter, the kind that had teeth in it. She looked up without deciding to. It was instinct, the same way you turn towards a sound that didn't belong, and what she saw across the parking lot registered in her mind in parts, the way bad things always do when your brain is trying to process them faster than it should have to. An older man, on the ground, one hand braced against the concrete, trying to push himself up and not quite managing it. The motorcycle a few feet away tipped over, the chrome catching the fluorescent light from the station's overhang. Standing around him, not just standing arranged. People arrange themselves when they've made a decision about what's going to happen next, and they want the person in the middle of them to understand that clearly. He saw all of it in about 2 seconds. She spent the next 2 deciding, debating, not running through options or calculating risk or talking herself into something. She's not a complicated thinker when the moment was simple. And this moment, beneath all its noise, was very simple. Speechless man on the ground. 6 men around him. Everyone else was pretending very hard to look at something else. When she had seen that before. That particular quality of group inaction. The way a crowd of individuals could collectively decide that the thing happening in front of them was somehow not their problem, not their business, not their moment. She'd been able to do it herself. She didn't know if that was courage or stubbornness or just a fundamental failure of self-preservation. Probably some combination of all three. The chain was in the bed of her truck, been meaning to return it to a customer who had left it 2 weeks ago and kept forgetting it without thinking. It was heavy and cold and real in her hands, and it felt like the right thing to be holding. She walked across the parking lot. She was aware that she was doing something that most people would call insane, aware that she was going to do it anyway. And some arguments are over before they start. One of the men noticed her first. Big, broad-shouldered, wearing a red jacket that looked expensive in the way that things look expensive when someone paid a lot for something that wasn't worth it. He turned and looked at her the way men sometimes looked at women who showed up somewhere they weren't expected, like she had wandered in from somewhere else and hadn't understood the situation yet. Away from him, Emily said. That was all she said. The man in the red jacket looked at her for a moment, then looked at the chain in her hands, then looked back at her face, and then he did something she did not anticipate. He smiled. You're kidding me, he said. I'm not. One of them laughed. Man off to the right, with a shaved head, and the particular energy of someone who had been looking for permission to escalate something for the last 10 minutes and was now very excited about the direction things were heading. Did you come from, sweetheart? You lost? I'm not lost, Emily said. I'm standing right here. She wasn't brave in the movie sense. Hands were not steady. You don't? was running about 40 beats per minute over its usual pace, and there was a cold sensation working its way up from her stomach that she recognized as fear and chose deliberately ignore. This, the man on the ground had managed to get himself to a sitting position. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not gratitude yet, not hope, one. Something more like disbelief mixed with a kind of sharp focus of someone who was very quickly reassessing what was happening around them. He was older, maybe 60. His face had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades outdoors and in difficult situations without flinching at either. It was leather, dark and worn, with patches she couldn't read from where she was standing. His beard was silver. His eyes were the quiet kind that watch everything and react to very little. "Lady," he said. His voice was calm in a way that surprised her. Not calm, the way frightened people got calm when they were trying not to show it. Way deep water is calm composed, all the way down. Down, Emily said, not looking away from the 6 men. The man in the red jacket seemed to reach some kind of decision. He took a step toward her. Emily didn't move. She held the chain with both hands, not raised, not swinging, just present. Her eyes were on his, and she did not blink first. She had grown up dealing with men who doubted her competence on a daily basis. She had been underestimated in this particular way her entire adult life. A long time ago, that the response to being underestimated was not to shrink. The response was to stand still and let the other person's assumption become their problem. The man stopped. He stopped because something in her face told him something he wasn't expecting, that she had already run the calculation on this situation and arrived at a place where she was not going to back down regardless of what he decided to do next. And people who have chosen not to back down have a particular look to them. It's very hard to misread once you know what you're looking for. He looked at the chain again, then he looked at his group. "This isn't worth it," he said, in the tone of someone who was trying to make a retreat sound like a decision. The shorter, bald man looked like he disagreed. But the man in the red jacket was clearly the one who made the calls, and he had made one. They gathered themselves up with the particular energy of a group that wants to leave without looking like they're leaving, and then they left, heading toward 2 SUVs at the far end of the lot, not running, but definitely not lingering. Lee watched them until they were gone. Then she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Then she turned around to look at the man on the ground who was watching her with that same unreadable expression. She asked. "I've been better," he said. "Been a lot worse." She set the chain down, walked over to his motorcycle, and assessed the damage, and had taken an impact. The handlebar was bent when the left fork was scraped, but she didn't see structural failure. The mirror was cracked clean off. She crouched next to it and ran her hands along the frame with the same automatic attention she gave every machine she touched. She asked. "They ran me off the road about a half-mile back. Got the bike upright and limped here. That's when they pulled in after me." "And you off on purpose?" "Felt that way." "Why?" Pause. He looked at her steadily. "That's a longer conversation." He didn't push it. "You ride this far?" "Came in on the front rim most of the way." "She's tougher than she looks." "Handlebars bent. I can fix that tonight if you want. The shop 4 miles from here." He looked at her for a long moment. "Mechanic?" "Best one in the county," she said. Just accurately. Something shifted in his expression. Small thing, but she caught it. "Your name?" "Emily Walker. Your father had a shop here." "Walker's Custom Garage." "Now." He nodded slowly. "William Sullivan," he said. "People call me Ace." She didn't recognize the name. She recognized the patches on his vest. She wasn't deeply connected to the biker world, though she'd repaired plenty of motorcycles for plenty of riders over the years. She just saw a man who needed his machine fixed. "You got someone you can call?" she asked. "I'll make some calls while you work." "All right," she said. "Let me get my truck." She rigged the motorcycle into the bed of her truck with a care that Ace watched with quiet attention. She used her tie-downs the way someone used them who had done it 1,000 times and knew exactly how much tension to put on each strap without being told. When she was done, she went back to the cab, then pulled out of the gas station of the 4 miles back to Walker's custom garage without saying much of anything. He turned the lights on in the shop. It jumped to life the way it always did, warm and smelling of oil and metal, and the particular combination of things that meant work, real work, the kind that produced something solid at the end of it. She unloaded the motorcycle with the same efficiency she'd loaded it on the center stand, walked around it once. Dude made a mental inventory. Ace stood to the side and watched. See, she went to work, the handlebar off in 7 minutes, and was already at her tube bending station when she heard him say, quietly, behind her, "Behind one, how long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 9, she said, without looking up. "Your father teach you?" He knew. "I filled in the rest myself." It happened to him. She didn't stop working. He died 14 months ago. Heart, he was sitting in that chair. She nodded at the cracked armrest chair in the corner. And they said it was quick. Ace said nothing for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She brought the tube back to the bike and began fitting it. It took concentration, the kind that closed out the peripheral noise, and she let it. Something clean about the work. There always was. Everything else in her life was uncertain. The precision of mechanics was unchanging. Part either fit or it didn't. The laws that governed it didn't shift based on who was doing the measuring. "You knew those men?" she asked. She was tightening bolts now, checking torque. "Personally." "I know who sent them." She looked up at that. "Someone sent them?" "Someone wanted to send me a message." Was received. He said it without self-pity or visible anger. Just an acknowledgement of the situation. "What kind of message?" Ed looked at her for a moment. "Assessing something. Stay out of things that aren't your business kind." Another pause. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who already stepped into someone else's situation tonight." "Curious," she said. "And I figure I've already crossed whatever line you're worried about." "Me crossing?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Point. One. She checked the mirror damage. One. Calculated the replacement. Went to her parts inventory. She did, and found what she needed. The shop was not the biggest in the county, but her father had stocked it with the particular care of someone who believed in being prepared for everything. And Emily had maintained that standard even when money was tight. "Custom," Ace said, reading the faded sign above her workbench. "How long has the shop been here?" 22 years. "My father started it the year I was born. Good location. Road access." Something in the way he said. It made her glance at him. He was looking at the sign, not at her, and his expression gave nothing away. "It used to be a better location," she said. "Town's changed. New development coming in from the south. They've been eating up properties all along this corridor." "You had any offers on this place?" She tightened the last bolt before she answered. "In the last 8 months, same company each time. Keep coming back with higher numbers." "You sell?" "No, why not?" She put her wrench down and looked at him directly. "My father built it. Because it's his. Because some things aren't for sale." Held her gaze. And this time the thing that moved in his expression was not just adjacent to a smile, closer to something like recognition, the particular acknowledgement of someone who has heard a statement they understand at a level that goes past words. "How much are they offering?" he asked. She told him the number. He didn't react visibly, but she saw his jaw shift the smallest fraction. He turned that down 3 times. He was quiet for a long moment. She finished the mirror installation, did a final walk around of the motorcycle, and stepped back. Emily said. "Handlebars straight, mirrors solid, fork took cosmetic damage only. I'd want to do a fuller inspection in daylight before you put her on the highway. But for tonight, she's roadworthy, if you're careful." Ace walked to the motorcycle and ran his own hand along the fork. He pressed on the handlebar with both hands the way a rider did, feeling the alignment. Looked at it from 3 angles. "Good work," he said. He paid her. He paid her more than she asked, and when she tried to correct him, he shook his head once. "You did back there in that parking lot." He said, "That was worth more than the repair." "You didn't do it for payment," she said. I know you didn't. That's why I'm telling you. It mattered. He called someone on his phone while she cleaned up her workbench. She didn't listen to the conversation. She heard his voice low, even saying information without dramatizing it. And she caught fragments. Road name. Ziston. Gas station. Company name. Lance 1. That last one snagged her attention, but she didn't ask about it. So the time she had the shop straightened and the motorcycle loaded for him to take two men she'd never seen before. Arrived in a van, polite and efficient, loaded the bike with the particular care of people and who knew exactly what they were doing. It was past midnight. Ace shook her hand at the door. His grip was firm and dry, and it lasted exactly the right amount of time. Be back tomorrow, he said. You need more work done? I need to talk to you, he said. About your shop. She looked at him. What about it? He held her gaze. Something isn't right about what's happening to this place. Pattern before. I've seen the pattern before, and I think you deserve to know what you're actually dealing with. She wanted to ask more. She could feel the questions stacking up behind her teeth. There was something in the way he said it, not threatening, not pitying, just absolutely serious, that told her this was not the moment for the full conversation, that the full conversation was going to require more than a parking lot and a late night and a first meeting. She said. He nodded. He walked to the van. He got in. She stood in the doorway of her father's shop and watched the taillights disappear down the road. And she thought about what he'd said. Something isn't right. About what's happening to this place, and felt the words settle into her chest next to the thing she had been trying not to feel for 14 months. Exactly. Not anger. Exactly. More like the specific sensation of something that had been hidden being held up to the light. She went back inside. She sat in her father's chair with the cracked armrest. She looked at the walls of the shop, the old photographs, pictures, the newspaper clipping from 1997, when the local paper had done a small feature on Thomas Walker and his growing reputation. The worn smooth countertop where 10,000 cups of coffee had been set down by 10,000 different hands, and she listened to the quiet. Something isn't right. She had known that for months. She just hadn't known yet what she was dealing with. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would find out. Bitten at stint. She didn't go home that night. She fell asleep in the chair with her work boots still on and the lights still burning and the smell of fresh motor oil hanging in the air around her, like something that had always been there, like something that was going to be there long after everything else was decided. She slept, and she did not dream. And outside in the dark Arizona night that ran past Walker's custom garage was quiet and still, and waiting the way everything waits before something begins. She woke up in the chair at 6:15 with a crick in her neck and the sun already pressing through the shop windows with the particular aggression of an Arizona morning that had no interest in easing you into the day. She sat still for a moment, the way she always did when she woke in an unfamiliar position, letting her mind reassemble the previous night in the correct order. The gas station, the 6 men, the chain in her hands. William Sullivan Ace watching her from the ground with those quiet, deep water eyes. The conversation about the shop. And then the last thing he'd said before he left, the thing that had followed her into sleep and was still there now, waiting for her to pick it up again. Something isn't right about what's happening to this place. She stood up, rolled her neck until it cracked, and went to the back of the shop where her father had installed a small bathroom with a utility sink. She washed her face and her hands and looked at herself in the water-spotted mirror above the sink. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had slept in a chair with her boots on and made no apologies about it. The coffee on. She had 2 hours before he said he'd come back. She used them the way she always used time she was waiting through she worked. It was a 74 Harley Sportster she'd had in the shop for 3 days, belonging to an older man named Dennis, who came in twice a year for comprehensive service and always left a 20 in the tip jar, even though she told him a dozen times she didn't have a tip jar. Take Dawson. The Sportster needed a primary chain adjustment and the front brake pads were down to nothing. It went still. She got to work. There is a particular quality to working alone in a garage in the early morning that she had always valued without being able to articulate it precisely. The town was quiet outside. The machines were not. They had their own conversation, metal and friction, and the soft protests of things that needed attention. And she was fluent in every word of it, torquing the brake caliper bolts when she heard the motorcycles. Multiple. She straightened up, wiped her hands on the shop rag at her waist. It grew, and then 3 motorcycles swung into her lot and parked in a line with the particular ease of people who had been parking motorcycles in formation their entire adult lives. Got off the first one. The other 2 were men she had never seen. One was younger than Ace by probably 15 years, dark-haired, heavy-set in a way that suggested not softness but density, the kind of build that came from a life of physical labor done without complaint. Taller, leaner, with silver streaking through his beard and the observant stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time watching before they decided anything. Both wore vests. Both had patches she could read now that they were closer. She had grown up in Arizona. She knew the name the way everyone in the state knew it, part reputation, part legend, part the particular truth that comes from decades of reality filling in around a myth. She felt the small, involuntary alert that any honest person would feel, and she acknowledged it without letting it make her decisions for her. Walked up to her. On. In daylight, he looked exactly the same as he had in the shop at midnight, which told her something about him, that he was not the kind of person who edited himself based on the hour or the light or who was watching. He said, "Ace, these are friends of mine." Ramos, the heavyset one, nodded. No smile, but no hostility either. Attention. "And that's Danny Croft." The tall one with the silver beard looked at her for a moment, with the specific patience of someone who was reserving judgment, which she respected more than someone who jumped straight to friendly. "The one who stood up last night," he said. "That's me." "You know who we are?" he asked. Direct, no edges to it. Just a question. "Hell's Angels," she said. "Arizona chapter." Danny nodded slowly. "You nervous?" She considered lying and decided against it. "A little. I'm also someone who grabbed a chain in a parking lot last night because something needed doing." Those 2 things can exist at the same time. Something moved in Danny's expression. He glanced at Ramos and then back at her and said, "Yeah, it can." Ace had walked past her into the shop. Not rudely, he'd glanced back with a look that asked permission, and she'd given it with a tilt of her head. He was looking at the Sportster now, hands in his pockets, reading the work she'd already done the way a knowledgeable person read it. "You do this morning?" he asked. "Since 6. Fine." Primary chain was stretched to the last legal adjustment. Pads were at 3 millimeters. Front fork seals are seeping. "I'm going to do those next." He crouched next to the fork and looked without touching at the brake assembly she'd already replaced. Then he stood. "The 3 offers you told me about last night," he said, without any transition. "The development company. You remember the name on the paperwork?" She always remembered. Meridian Pacific Development. He made a sound, not loud, not dramatic. Just a short, controlled exhale through his nose that said a great deal without saying anything. He looked at him. "You know them. We know of them," Ace said carefully. "Me about the first time they approached you." It's her, she told him. 5 months after her father died, a man in a very clean suit had come into the shop on a Wednesday afternoon and handed her a business card and said that his company was very interested in acquiring properties along the Route 9 corridor and that Walker's garage was a particularly attractive opportunity. He had been polite, professional. The number he'd offered had made her blink. She'd have told him no. He'd said, of course, and thank you, and to keep the card. And 2 months later, man, a different, same company, same professional polish, number. She'd said no. Again, he'd said they hoped she'd reconsider and left. The time was 6 weeks ago. The number had gone up again. But this time the man had stayed a little longer than the other 2. He had walked around the shop in a way that felt less like interest and more like inventory. Before he left, he had said something that had stayed with her like a splinter she couldn't quite work out. He said the market was moving fast on this corridor. He said sometimes businesses like mine ended up being better positioned to sell before circumstances changed. And Danny exchanged a look that was too quick and too loaded for her to read fully. Before circumstances changed, Danny repeated. That's what he said. That visit, Ace said, did anything change? Customers, complaints, anything. Quiet for a moment. My two biggest commercial accounts canceled within 3 weeks of that visit, she said slowly, picking it out as she said it. I thought it was coincidence. On a fleet service account and a local courier company. Them told me they were going with a shop closer to Phoenix. They'd been with us with my father for years. Did you follow up? I called both. The fleet manager wouldn't get on the phone with me. Company owner said he'd received feedback that the quality of service at our shop had declined since the ownership change. She paused. We hadn't changed anything. Our process was identical to what my father did. Mo spoke for the first time. His voice was lower than she'd expected, deliberate. Who gave him that feedback? He wouldn't say. He said it was an industry review. Something online. Ace walked to her workbench and leaned against it, crossed his arms. He looked like a man who was deciding how much to tell someone and had arrived at a number. Indian Pacific has done this before, he said. 3 times that we know about in this region. Identify properties they want. Properties that are sitting on land worth significantly more than what the business is making. They apply pressure. Not obvious pressure. Quiet pressure. Reviews that appear. Customers that drift away. Suppliers that suddenly can't deliver. Code complaints that come from nowhere. Emily felt something go cold and flat in the center of her chest. We manufacture the decline, she said. They accelerate it. So those businesses were already struggling. But Meridian helps things along. He paused. Then they come in with an offer to the desperate owner who just watched their livelihood fall apart and doesn't understand why. Desperate people take what they're given. She was very still. She was running back through the last 8 months, the way you ran back through something you'd been looking at from the wrong angle, and things she'd blamed on her own inadequacy. The customers she thought she'd lost because she was young or female or not her father. The moment she'd sat in that chair with the cracked armrest and wondered if she was simply not good enough to hold this place together. How long has this been going on? She said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. You think it started before your father died? Ace said. Landed differently. She looked at him before. 9 corridor development plan is not new. We've been looking at it for about a year, since we started hearing about small businesses in the area having very similar problems. Complaints they couldn't explain, accounts that vanished. Sure to sell. He paused. Your father's shop was always on the list, Emily. His property is one of the most valuable on the corridor. She turned away from them. She walked to the small window at the side of the shop that looked out over the lot, and she stood there and she breathed through what had just entered her body. It was not grief exactly, and not anger exactly, but something that required its own word. The feeling of discovering that the ground you were standing on had been less solid than you believed, and for longer than you knew. Her father had known. That was what Ace was telling her. He hadn't said it directly. Not yet, but the shape of it was there. Walker had been a careful man, a principled man, a man who, when something wasn't right, did not walk away from it. He thought about the last year of his life. She had been here in the shop beside him for most of it, and she tried now to remember whether he had seemed different. There had been moments of wait she hadn't asked about. He'd been quieter in the last few months before he died. He had attributed it to fatigue, to age, to the particular way some men carried things silently because they had decided the burden was theirs alone. She turned back around. What do you know about my father? She said. Did not flinch from the directness of it. Not enough yet, but I know that Thomas Walker made a formal complaint to the county business registry about Meridian Pacific 8 months before he died. The complaint was filed and then went nowhere. The air in the shop felt different. He never told me, she said. No, Ace said. He wouldn't have. Not until he had something solid at the cracked armrest chair in the corner. She thought all about all the nights her father had sat there after closing, all the times she'd left him there with his coffee and his thoughts, and assumed those thoughts were just the ordinary weight of running a business and getting older. She thought about how thoroughly she had underestimated what he might have been carrying. Did the complaint say? She asked. We're still trying to get access to the full filing, Danny said. The registry is less than cooperative, which in our experience means someone got to them. The cold, flat thing in her chest sharpened into something with edges. One got to the county. It's not unheard of, Ramos said, defensively. Just matter of fact, the way you said things that were ugly but true. Indian is not small. They have lawyers and money, and the kind of patience that comes from knowing you're going to win. Eventually. Then how do you fight them? Emily asked. Ace looked at her for a long moment. Them by not being alone, he said. The three men stayed in the shop for nearly 2 hours. Most turned out to have mechanical knowledge that surprised her. He'd been a machinist before he was anything else. He told her a fact. Samus a wrench at one point, with her permission, and helped her with the fork seals while they talked. Danny sat on a stool near the workbench and asked questions, precise, intelligent questions that revealed a mind behind the stillness, someone who was building a picture one careful brushstroke at a time. She answered everything, honestly. She pulled out her father's files from the cabinet by the desk, the physical ones he'd kept in a system that only made complete sense. If you understood how Thomas Walker organized his thinking, Emily did, because she was the one he'd taught it to. She showed them the purchase offers from Meridian, the formal letters with their careful corporate language sounded like opportunity, and felt, looking at them now, one like something else entirely. Danny photographed the documents with his phone. Is there anything else? He asked. Files that might relate to the complaint, he filed. Anything that looks like research lists of names, property records, correspondence. He thought about it. My father kept a second filing system. He called it his insurance drawer. She paused. I haven't touched it. It's in the office upstairs. He told me once it was for things he wasn't ready to share yet. Expected that. All three of them looked at her. Ace said carefully, it might be time to look at it. The second floor of the shop was small and used mostly for storage, old parts, reference manuals, 2 filing cabinets. There's a desk up there that her father had used when he needed to do paperwork away from the noise and interruption of the shop floor. A single window looked out over the lot. The place smelled like him, more than anywhere else in the building. He felt it when she pushed the door open. She crossed to the desk. In the bottom left drawer, the insurance drawer, he'd called it, joking, the way he half joked, about things he was completely serious about. She found a folder, dark green, labeled in his handwriting, neat capital letters. It said Moot 9. She stood there for a moment with her hand on it, standing in the doorway. He didn't come in. As her stood, she thought that this space required a different kind of permission. She opened the folder. The first thing she saw was a hand-drawn map. Her father had always preferred drawing his own maps over printing them, a personal preference she had never questioned. 9 corridor from the southern end of Redwood Valley up to the county line with property marked in different colors. For sold, blue for under pressure, yellow for pending. 9 red properties, 6 blue ones. Walker's custom garage was marked in yellow. The diner on Main Street. So was the hardware store. So was the old community center that had been struggling with its lease for the last year. The page. Dates, names, amounts. Formal and specific, laid out with sit of someone who understood that the difference between documentation and gossip was evidence. Father had been documenting the Meridian Pacific campaign for at least 18 months before he died. He had names. He had dates of contact. He had amounts offered and refused. And he had 2 signed statements from other business owners, their signatures at the bottom of neatly typed accounts of pressure they had experienced. He'd been building a case. He knew, she said. Her voice came out low, up at Ace in the doorway. He knew all of it, documenting it. He was collecting evidence. His jaw shifted. How far back does it go? She checked the earliest date on the documents. Up. 23 months ago. The weight of it settled over the room. He died. 8 months into this, she said. Neither of them said the obvious thing. Didn't need to. She was already there. At the edge of the thought she had been moving towards since the moment Ace had told her the complaint was filed 8 months before her father's death. She stood at that edge and she breathed. And she looked at the numbers and the timeline. And she told herself she did not know what it meant yet. She told herself that. And she almost believed it. She took the folder downstairs. She spread the contents on her workbench. Danny and Ramos came around to look, spoke for a full 2 minutes. Everyone, just the quiet sound of documents being carefully turned over, eyes moving across her father's methodical, serious, replaceable handwriting. He names a contact at the county registry, Danny said. An employee, someone who was supposed to be routing his formal complaint through for review. It's the same office that went quiet on the complaint, Ramos said. Danny said. They looked at each other. Waited look again. The one she was starting to understand carried the compressed weight of decisions made in quiet rooms with serious consequences. Something else, Emily said. She had held this back for 30 seconds while she decided whether to say it. She decided yes, the man who came with the third offer 6 weeks ago. He wasn't like the first two. He was different. He knew things about the shop that he shouldn't have known. Specific equipment I was having serviced, a parts supplier relationship I'd just set up, interior details, things you wouldn't know from a drive-by or a public record. It was very still. You think someone was inside your shop, he said. Someone was inside my shop, she confirmed. Ramos said something very short and very quiet, was not appropriate for polite company, and was entirely appropriate for the situation. You want to know who, Emily said. Not loudly, not dramatically. The particular flatness of someone who has moved past. Feeling things about a situation and arrived at the part where they decide what to do about it. He looked at Ace. He looked back at her, and she saw at the moment his assessment of her completed itself the moment he arrived at the same conclusion she suspected he'd been approaching since the parking lot. Not just that she was brave, not just that she was competent, but that she was the right kind of person to be standing in the middle of this someone who had something worth protecting. The specific combination of a stubbornness and precision and earned grief that made her not run from it. I'll help you find out, he said. The words were simple. He said them the way he said everything, without performance, without excess. Just the thing itself, placed in the air between them like something solid. She nodded. She picked up her father's Route 9 folder, held it for a moment, and then set it on the desk with a care that was not about the paper. Because outside in the lot, someone pulled in. She heard it, the particular sound of an unfamiliar engine, and looked out the window. A dark sedan, moving slowly, it pulled to the edge of the lot, stopped, didn't park, just sat there, engine running. Ramos had already moved to the shop window. You know that car? He asked her. Seen it. The sedan sat for another 30 seconds. Then it pulled out and drove away without anyone getting out or coming to the door. In the shop said it was probably nothing, because nobody believed it was. Danny took out his phone and was already dialing before the sedan had cleared the lot. He stepped out of earshot, but she could see his face from where she stood, and his face said this was not a surprise. His face said this was exactly the kind of thing that happened when you were getting close to something someone else wanted to stay hidden. He looked at Ace. They're watching, she said. Yes, he said. Because of what my father started. Because of what you're about to finish, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her wrench, went back to Dennis's Sportster, and she finished the fork seals with steady hands while the day moved forward and the town moved around them, and somewhere out on the Route 9 corridor, and put miles between itself and Walker's custom garage, and someone on the other end of a phone received a report about what they'd seen. What they'd seen was a young mechanic in her father's shop doing her work. What they couldn't see yet was what she was deciding. And what she was deciding was this. Her father had started something important. He built it carefully and with the precision and quietly, and with the precision of a man who understood that the truth was only useful if it was documented and provable and held in the right hands at the right moment. He had not been able to finish it. He had left the shop to her, everything to her. He had left everything to her. She understood now she had not been given a failing business and a pile of debt and an impossible situation. She had been given an inheritance of a different kind. His evidence, his documentation, his case, his fight. And the question was not whether she was going to take it on. The question was how. The wrench turned, the seal seated, fork compressed, smooth and clean with exactly the right resistance. She wiped her hands. She stood up. She looked at the shop around her, the photographs, the tools, the chair, the sign, and she felt something she had not felt in 14 months. Not fear, something older than both of those. Something her father would have recognized immediately. The thing that lived in the Walker family like a gene that didn't skip generations. Refusal to walk away from something that mattered. Danny came back inside with his phone in his hand and his face arranged in the careful neutral of someone who had just heard something that required a controlled response. He had learned in the last 2 hours that Danny Croft's face was a precision instrument. It told you exactly as much. He decided to tell you too, no more. It was telling her that whatever he just heard was not small. Sedan, he said. We've seen it before. Different town, same company. Those moves. It's how Meridian moves when they think something is developing that they need to monitor. You're not just watching the shop, Ramos said. They're watching her. Put her wrench down on the workbench slowly and deliberately. She did it slowly because she needed a moment, and the wrench was the thing she could put down without anyone commenting on it. How long have they been watching me? She asked. Based on what we know about how they operate, Ace said, probably since the third offer. When you turned it down again, you stopped being a soft target. It became a problem. She absorbed that, a problem. She'd been continuing her father's work without knowing it. And Meridian Pacific had known she was doing it before she did. They were watching my father, she said. And now they're watching me. Read, Danny said. Then we need to move faster than they are, she said. Ace looked at her with that same quiet assessment. Do you have in mind? She crossed to the desk, opened her father's Route 9 folder again, and pulled out the 2 signed statements the business owners who had documented the pressure they'd experienced. Laid them on the bench. These people signed statements for my father, she said. She knew what was happening, and they were willing to say so. Still in the area. Danny looked at the names. Mendez. That's the woman who ran the dry cleaning place on Route 9 South. Sold 8 months ago. He paused. Gerald Park. He had the auto parts store near the county line. Did they sell because they wanted to? Emily asked. You bet against it, Ramos said. Then they might still be willing to talk, Emily said. Not just a signed statement, on record, formally, to take somewhere that Meridian can't make disappear. The room was quiet for a moment. That's a harder ask than a signed statement, Ace said. Then, people who sell under pressure don't always want to revisit it. Toots. And went still, especially when the company they're dealing with has already demonstrated it can reach into county government, Emily said. But my father believed they were willing to fight, and have taken their statements otherwise. Be careful about what he built. She looked at the signatures on the documents. Call them. She found the contact information her father had clipped to the statements, his precise handwriting on an index card, 2 names, 2 phone numbers. She picked up her phone. Ace watched her. He didn't try to talk her out of it or advise her to wait. She appreciated that more than she could have said. He rang. She called Carla Mendez first. 3 rings. Then a woman's voice, guarded the way people answered when they didn't recognize the number and had learned to be cautious. Hello. Mrs. Mendez, my name is Emily Walker. Thomas Walker was my father. A motorcycle shop on Route 9. Pause, a long one. Then, I know who Thomas was. He had your statement about Meridian Pacific. I found it in his files. Another pause. And this time. That was a long time ago, Carla Mendez said. 8 months, Emily said. I know you sold. I know it probably wasn't what you wanted. I know asking you to talk about this again is it took my shop, Carla said. Her voice had changed, was still there, but underneath it, something else had surfaced, something older and harder. 20 years I had that place. My mother worked there with me for the first 11. She took it, and nobody did anything. My father tried to do something, Emily said. He filed a complaint. It went nowhere. But he left everything he'd gathered, all the documentation, all the records, and I found it. And I'm not willing to let it sit in a drawer. Silence on the line. Emily waited. She had learned from her father that silence was not the same as refusal, and that the instinct to fill it was one of the most counterproductive impulses a person could act on. What are you planning to do? Carla asked. Build a real case, a county complaint that can be buried, something that goes higher, something they can't walk into an office and make disappear. I'm working on that, Emily said honestly. I don't have all of it figured out yet, but I have people helping me who know how this kind of thing works. And I have my father's documentation, and I want your voice in it if you're willing. Long silence. The man who bought my shop, Carla said, and he works for Meridian. He told me the offer was final and that if I tried to dispute it through the courts, it would take years and I'd spend more than the shop was worth on lawyers. She paused. Probably right. But it didn't feel right. None of it ever felt right. Isn't right, Emily said. That's exactly what it wasn't. Carla breathed. All right, Carla said. Tell me what you need. Emily wrote down Carla's new address. She'd moved to a town 20 miles east after the sale and told her she'd be in touch within 2 days. She hung up and immediately called Gerald Park, picked up on the first ring, which told her he was someone who stayed close to his phone, and his voice had the particular alertness of a man who had been waiting for something without being able to name it. When she said her name and her father's name, he said, I wondered when someone would call. He didn't need convincing. He needed a direction to point himself in. He'd had that energy for months. She could hear it, someone with something to say, and no one to say it to. He told her in 7 minutes what had taken Carla Mendez 20 to work up to. Then Meridian's approach, pressure. The big one, the manufactured complaints. The sense of walls closing in without anyone you could point to and say, here, everyone, this is the person doing it. He'd sold his auto parts store 4 months ago, and he had regretted it every single day since. Gerald said, is that you don't feel robbed. You feel stupid, like you made the decision yourself. You didn't. They just made sure the decision was the only one left. Your father knew that, Emily said. He documented the whole pattern. Thomas was a smart man, Gerald said. Careful. He called me twice after I gave him that statement. Time was about a month before he died. He said he was getting close to something. He'd found a name. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Someone inside Meridian, not just a developer or a lawyer, with political connections. He said, when he had enough to tie it together, it was going to be bigger than just Route 9. Gerald paused. Then he died, and I figured that was the end of it, Emily said. He didn't tell me. He said he didn't want to put it on anyone else until he was sure. She felt the frustration of it, her father's caution, which she understood and respected, working against her now in the way that caution sometimes did. She said, if there's anything else he told you, any detail, even something that seemed small at the time, I want to hear it. Come see me, Gerald said. I've got some things of my own I've been holding on to. Know who to give them to. She looked at Ace. He had heard enough of both conversations to understand where they stood. A single nod. I'll come tomorrow, she said. She hung up. She put the phone on the bench. Park says, my father found a name, she said. Oh, one. Someone with political connections inside or connected to Meridian. He died before he could tell anyone what it was. Danny and Ramos exchanged that look again. One. She was beginning to read as, this is the part we were afraid of. Father's death, Danny said, carefully. Was there an investigation? Failure, she said. He was 61. He had high blood pressure. He'd been stressed for years. Found nothing suspicious. She heard her own voice saying it and heard the words she hadn't used, suspicious, sitting in the middle of the sentence, like something she'd put there intentionally. She had. She had been thinking it since Ace told her the complaint had been filed 8 months before his death, standing at the edge that thought for 2 hours. Now, she stepped over the edge and looked at it directly, and her hands were steady because she had already decided that falling apart was not something she could afford and not something she was going to do. "You're not saying he was killed," she said. "I'm saying he was under significant stress. He was fighting something alone, and he died. I have his files and his documentation, and I'm telling you there's a name in there somewhere that someone did not want him to find." She met her eyes. "We'll help you find it." She nodded once, back to the workbench. And she picked up the Route 9 folder and she started going through it again. Slower this time, looking not for the pattern she'd already found, but for the name her father had been protecting by not saying it out loud. It took her 40 minutes. It wasn't in the main file. It was in the last page of the folder, tucked behind a document. She'd already looked at a property transaction. In records she'd moved past too quickly the first time. And at the bottom of the page, in the small, careful print her father used when he was writing something he considered significant, were 3 words and a title. At them. She read them twice. Then she looked up. "His name is Richard Colton," she said, "and according to my father's notes, he's a county commissioner." Silence in the shop was different from the silences before it. This one had weight and consequence inside it. Danny stopped moving. Mouse looked at the folder. Ace looked at Emily. "Colton," Danny said. Question. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of something he'd been building toward and didn't enjoy arriving at, Emily said. "Of him," Danny said. "Richard Colton has been county commissioner for 11 years. He's well-liked, visible, the kind of man who shows up at every community event and shakes every hand and knows everyone's name." He paused. "He's also the commissioner who oversees the county business registry. Her father's complaint had been filed to fill it all where it had gone silent, where someone had gotten to the process before it could go anywhere. He's not just connected to Meridian," Emily said slowly, working it through. "Who buried my father's complaint. That's what the evidence is suggesting," Ace said. He thought about the man who had been shaking hands at community events for 11 years while the businesses along Route 9 were being systematically dismantled. She thought about her father sitting in this shop, figuring it out piece by piece, naming the name, knowing what it meant, standing that a county commissioner with 11 years of political capital and a development company behind him was not a small adversary. She thought about her father dying in that chair before he could do anything about it. "Signed statements," she said. "Documentation going back 2 years between Meridian Pacific and a county official who buried the formal complaint against them." She looked at the 3 men. To bring this somewhere, it can't be buried again. Danny pulled up a chair. He sat. When Danny Croft sat down to talk, she had already learned it meant the conversation was about to become specific and real. "You need a journalist," he said. "Not a local one, someone from the state press. One with the resources to verify independently and the platform to make it so loud that Colton can't manage it quietly." "I don't know any journalists," Emily said. "We might," Ramos said. "Doten." She looked at him. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and under the deliberate stillness she could see him running something through in his mind. "There's a woman at the Phoenix Tribune," Ramos said. "She did a piece 2 years ago on a similar land acquisition scheme in Pima County. I know her personally, but I know the piece. You can find her," Danny said. "And we need the other business owners," Emily said. "Not just Carla and Gerald. The ones my father marked in red, the ones who already sold. Might be willing to come forward if they know the evidence already exists. They know they're not alone in it. People are a lot more willing to talk when they can see they've got company," Ace said. "That's what we build," Emily said. "We build the company first. We make sure everyone who's been through this knows that other people have been through it too. And then we go to the journalist with a full picture. A complaint, a case. Danny nodded slowly. That's the right order. How much time do we have? Emily asked. She was not asking abstractly. Please think this. Because the dark sit-in had been in her lot this morning, and the fact of it was sitting in her head, a piece of metal in a wound not neutralized by acknowledging it, just made real. Probably not much, Ace said. When Meridian sees someone moving against them, their pattern is to accelerate. They want to close the deal on any remaining properties before the story can get traction. He paused. Expect things to get worse before they get better. He thought about the remaining blue properties on her father's map, the diner on Main Street, the hardware store, the community center. He thought about those owners. Us. People she'd known her entire life, waking up tomorrow, not knowing that the uncomfortable things that had been happening to them were not accidents. You need to talk to them, she said. The other businesses, before Meridian can get to them again. That's risky, Danny said. If they're watching you, then they're going to see me talking to my neighbors, she said, which is something they can't stop without showing their hand. She looked at Ace. Ace looked at her steadily for a moment. Right. Then I start today. She pulled out her phone. She pulled up the contact for Helen Marsh, who had run the Main Street Diner for 16 years, and whose Tuesday coffee was the best in the county, and who had mentioned 3 weeks ago, when the distracted way of someone trying not to show worry, that she'd had a couple of health code visits recently that seemed strange to her. She called. Helen answered, Emily, what's going on? I need 15 minutes with you, in person, today if possible. Pause. Should I be worried? You should be informed, Emily said. She met Helen at the diner, noon. She walked in and sat across from her at the corner booth where Helen had been eating her own lunch, alone for about as long as Emily could remember. And she spread her father's map on the table between them, and she told her everything. Was 64 years old, and she had survived a divorce, a flood that took out her back kitchen in 2011, bouts of flu. Bad enough to put her in the hospital, and 16 years of the kind of customer service that would test the patience of a saint. She was not a soft woman, but when Emily finished talking, Helen's eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with being about to cry and everything to do with being about to get very angry. Those one, the health code inspections, Helen said. Her voice was flat and controlled. 2 and 3 months. They found things I'd never had cited in 16 years. Your log that was technically out of compliance by 2 degrees. Label that was expired by 1 day. Manufactured pressure, Emily said. Enough to shut you down. Just enough to cost you time and money and stress. It's enough to soften you up. Helen looked at the map, at the red properties, the ones already taken. Then she looked at her own name on the blue list. You do, she said. I need you to be willing to say what happened. On record. Do I need a lawyer? It would be smart and help you find someone. I know a lawyer, Helen said. Since husband. He does property law. He's been after me for 2 years to call him about the lease issues on this building. Today, Emily said. I'll call him right now. Helen stood up from the booth, reached across the table, and gripped Emily's hand for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went to the back of the diner and Emily heard her on the phone. Before the kitchen door swung shut, she visited 3 more businesses that afternoon. A hardware store run by a man named Dave Kowalski, who had received 2 anonymous negative reviews online in the last month, detailed enough to have clearly come from someone who had been inside the store. A small insurance agency run by a woman named Patricia Seo, who had lost a major referral account she'd had for 8 years to a competing agency across town. The competing agency, she told her with a look that said she'd been waiting to say this to someone, had been bought out 6 months ago by a holding company she'd never been able to get information about. Contractor's office, whose owner, Ben Marrero, had found his business license renewal blocked 3 times in the last year for administrative reasons that were technically valid and practically absurd. The one she talked to had the same response. No reaction of someone who had been carrying something alone And suddenly discovers they weren't alone. After all, that particular combination of relief and anger that was almost physical, that made people stand differently, breathe differently, as if the weight they'd been redistributed into something more manageable. Then the second reaction. Are you sure? Is this really what it is? Them the map each time. She showed them the documentation. One, she showed them the timeline. She watched the doubt turn into comprehension, and she watched comprehension turn into something harder and cleaner. Doing this to all of us, Dave Kowalski said, staring at the map in his office. His voice was very quiet. Meridian has, and Colton has been providing cover. Richard Colton. He said the name like he was tasting something bad, shaking that man's hand at every 4th of July celebration for a decade. Vi, Emily said. She got back to the shop at 5:30 with 4 more people willing to give formal statements and a missed call from a number she didn't recognize. Called it back. A woman answered, professional voice. Quick, attentive. Is this Emily Walker? It is. My name is Sarah Okafor. I'm an investigative journalist at the Phoenix Tribune. You got a message that I should call you. Emily looked at Ace, who was still at the shop. Or nothing with his expression. Either he'd made the call or Danny had, and either way, it had been faster than she expected. Emily said, thank you for calling back. I have a story I think you need to hear. I'm told you have documentation, Sarah Okafor said. Question. Extensive documentation, going back 2 years. Multiple business owners, a named county official. A pattern that my father spent the last year of his life building a case against. Silence on the other end, the particular silence of a journalist identifying the shape of something real. When can you meet? Sarah asked. Whenever you can get here. I can be in Redwood Valley the day after tomorrow. I'll have everything ready. She hung up. She set the phone down on the workbench. She pressed both hands flat on the cool surface of the bench, and she breathed. He walked over. He stood beside her, not touching, just present. Your father had a name, she said. He had 2 years of documentation. A complaint, and it disappeared. He was a careful, thorough, principled man, and he couldn't get across the finish line alone. She paused. People am I missing? How many people along Route 9 gave up because they thought they were the only one? Probably more than we found, Ace said. Then we find them all, she said, before Okafor gets here. I want to walk her through a case that's so complete she doesn't have to take anyone's word for anything. 2 days, Ramos said. I know. You need sleep, Ace said. And I need answers more than I need sleep, Emily. His voice was even but firm. Lieutenant, a tired person makes mistakes, and right now mistakes are the most dangerous thing you can make. He was right. She also knew that somewhere across town a man named Richard Colton was probably being informed that the Walker girl was talking to people, and that the clock that had been running before was running faster now. She said, I'll go home, sleep 4 hours, and be back at 5 a.m. I'll be here, Ace said. She looked at him. 3 men in Hell's Angels vests who had walked into her father's shop 24 hours ago and were now as invested in this fight as she was. Taden. She thought about what that meant, not the legend, not the reputation, not everything the name carried in the public imagination. 3 people who had decided that something wasn't right and were willing to do something about it. Reason, she had grabbed a chain in a gas station parking lot. We're not complicated. One more thing before I go, she said. She went back upstairs to her father's office. She stood in front of the desk. She looked at the things he had left there, the careful man, the quiet man, the man who had spent the last months of his life building something he never had the chance to use. She opened the bottom left drawer again. Behind the Route 9 folder, tucked all the way at the back, was a small, white envelope. On the outside, in his handwriting. She had seen it the first time she came up here, and she had not opened it because she had been afraid of what opening it meant. And she was still afraid. She opened it anyway. Inside was a single index card. His handwriting, careful, neat, unhurried, the handwriting of a man who believed that what he was writing mattered and deserved to be written well. He said, I found it, Em. Everything we need to bring it down. It's in the safe at the shop. Combination is your birthday. was going to tell you. When I had the last piece, I thought I had more time. I'm sorry I didn't have more time. She stood there for a long time. Then she folded the card, put it in her shirt pocket, pressed her hand against her chest for just a moment, and walked back downstairs. "The safe in this shop," she said. Her voice was steady. "My father left me a note. He said everything we need to bring Meridian down is inside it." He said anything for a moment. Then Ace said, "Show us where it is." She went to the back wall of the shop, to the old shelving unit. She'd been looking at her entire life without thinking about it, and she moved the unit 18 inches to the left the way she'd seen her father do twice, without ever asking why. Behind it was a wall safe, steel door, combination lock. She dialed it. She heard the tumblers. Pulled the door open. The safe was not large, maybe 12 inches wide, 10 tall. Inside it was dense with intention, the particular density of things that had been gathered carefully over a long time by a man who understood that what he was collecting might be the most important work of his life. Reached in. She pulled everything out and laid it on the workbench with both hands. The way you handled something you understood was fragile, not in the physical sense, but in the consequential one. A USB drive. A second folder, thicker than the Route 9 folder from the desk. Sealed. Envelope, addressed to a name she didn't recognize, Martin Voss, attorney at law. Attorney at Phoenix. With a sticky note on the outside in her father's handwriting that said, "Only when ready to move." And a small leather notebook, the kind her father had always used, for thinking she had seen him write in notebooks like this her entire life and had never once looked inside one because they were his, and she was not the kind of person who read other people's private things. In this one, she started at the last entry, which was dated 11 days before he died. It said, "Colton's connection to Meridian isn't consulting fees like I thought. He owns a stake in the holding company that owns Meridian Pacific." Piece I was missing. That's why he buried the complaint he wasn't just covering for them, protecting his own investment. Have it documented now from 3 sources, giving everything to Voss tomorrow. He'll know what to do with it. Tomorrow that had never come. She read it twice. Then she looked up at Ace. She didn't say anything. He turned the notebook around and held it up, and he read it. He watched his face. Even Danny Croft's face, which she'd come to think of as a controlled instrument, moved at that. "He's a part owner," Danny said, quietly, working through what that meant. "Not a corrupt official being paid off," Ace said. "Official. Protecting his own financial interest." "It's not a bribery case," Danny said. "That's fraud. Conflict of interest at the county level, using his public office to protect a private investment. That's significantly worse than what we thought we were looking at. That's why the complaint disappeared," Ramos said. "He didn't just tell someone to lose it. He personally had the authority to shelve it. His own office oversees the registry." Emily set the notebook down, the thick second folder, and opened it. Father had done what her father always did. Organized everything with the precision of someone who built machines for a living and understood that the difference between a thing that worked and a thing that didn't was whether every piece was in its right place. The folder were financial documents she couldn't fully parse, but could read well enough to understand the architecture of one. Holding company structure, ownership percentage, the name Richard Colton appearing on a document that was clearly not meant for public view. The kind of corporate architecture that was designed to obscure exactly what it was doing. Also printed emails. She didn't know how her father had gotten them, and she understood that asking might not produce a simple answer. She had them, and they were dated, and they were specific correspondence between a Meridian executive named Dale Fitch and what appeared to be a personal email address she was now reasonably sure belonged to Colton, discussing the Route 9 acquisition timeline, discussing specific properties, discussing her father's shop by name. One email made her stop breathing for a moment. It was from Fitch to Colton, dated 4 months before her father died. It said, "The Walker property is the anchor parcel. Without it, the northern development cannot proceed. And he's not selling. We've tried 3 times. The old man is more connected than we thought. He's been talking to business owners, gathering information. This needs to be managed before it becomes a problem. It's your read on timeline. Colton's response, 2 days later, handle the business side. I'll handle the rest. Give it 90 days. 90 days. Father had died 73 days after that email. She stood there with the paper in her hand, and she felt something she had no name for. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was too big to fit inside the word that should have described it. Standing on the edge of this since yesterday morning, and now she had stepped off the edge, and there was nothing under her feet but the fact of it. The business side, I'll handle the rest. She put the paper down very carefully. She was watching her. I don't know what this means, she said. Her voice was level. She needed it to be level. I don't know if it means what it sounds like it means. You need someone who knows the law to look at this. Voss, Ace said, reading the sealed envelope on the bench. Father had already chosen someone. I don't know who he is. You can find out, Danny said. He had his phone out already. He was already looking. 30 seconds. Then, Martin Voss, assistant U.S. Attorney, Phoenix District, practiced for the last 6 years. Corporate fraud and white-collar crime he looked up. Father didn't pick a property lawyer. He picked someone who prosecutes people. The shop was very quiet. Call him, Emily said. Danny dialed. She listened without trying to pretend she wasn't. Danny identified himself was calling. On behalf of Emily Walker, of Thomas Walker, that Thomas had left a sealed envelope addressed to Martin Voss with instructions to contact him when ready to move, and then waited. She couldn't hear the other voice clearly, but she could hear its tone. She could hear it shift professional neutrality passionately to something more alert within about 20 seconds. He said, yes, tonight if possible. He hung up. He's coming, Danny said. He says he's been waiting for this call. He looked at him. He says Thomas contacted him 14 months ago, Danny said, before he died. He gave Voss a preliminary briefing and then told him he'd be in touch when the case was ready. When Voss said he never heard from him again, because he died, she thought, because he ran out of time. But he had planned for that. He had left the sealed envelope. He had left the note for Emily. He went still. He had left everything in the safe under her birthday because he knew if he didn't make it, she was the one who would find it. He'd been preparing for the possibility of his own absence while simultaneously refusing to be absent, while still sitting in the shop every day, working, fighting the case. And she had been there with him every day and hadn't known. She thought about how lonely that must have been. She thought about how much he must have loved her to carry it alone. She pressed her hand against her shirt pocket where his index card was, and she felt it there, the thin rectangle of it, the weight of something that weighed almost nothing. Okay, she said. Voss comes tonight. Sarah Okafor comes the day after tomorrow. If both of those things happen, I need every statement we have collected to be organized and time-stamped and cross-referenced against my father's documentation. She looked around at the 3 men. Need help. You've got it, Ramos said simply. No ceremony. They worked for 4 hours. Danny organized the financial documents into a chronological sequence with the precision of someone who had done this kind of work before and didn't need to explain why he knew how. Ramos called Gerald Park and Carla Mendez and walked them through the formal statement. Format Danny had drawn up. Patient and clear on the phone, with the particular steadiness of a man who understood that frightened people needed a voice that didn't waver. Emily went through her father's notebook page by page and transcribed every date, name, and cross-reference into a working document that linked each piece of evidence to the next. He made calls she wasn't entirely privy to. He stepped to the back of the shop, periodically and spoke in low tones that produced results she saw in the steady arrival of information would be a property record search on the holding company, a name connected to a shell entity that linked back through 3 layers of corporate structure to a firm that had Colton's signature on its articles of incorporation. At 9:30 that night, a black SUV pulled into the lot. A man got out. He was in his mid-50s, compact, carrying a laptop bag and the unhurried movement of someone who had stopped being in a hurry decades ago because he'd learned that being in a hurry made you miss things. He walked to the door of the shop and knocked even though it was open because he was the kind of man who knocked. "Walker," he said. "That's me." He looked at her for a moment. "You look like your father," he said. Same eyes, same way of standing. She felt that land in the middle of her chest, but she didn't move. "Mr. Voss." He came in. He set his laptop bag on the workbench, and he opened it without preamble. And for the next hour and 45 minutes, Martin Voss sat in her father's shop and went through everything. Every document, every email, every statement, every date in the notebook. He asked questions in the measured, specific way of someone who already understood the framework and was checking whether the evidence fitted, not trying to be convinced, just verifying. He got to the email. "Fitch to Colton. Handle the business side. Ben, I'll handle the rest. Give it 90 days. He read it. He looked up at Emily. "You understand what you're looking at," he said. "It's not a question." "I think so," she said. "Your father died 73 days after this email was sent. I'm not in a position to tell you what that means legally without a full investigation," Voss said carefully. "What I can tell you is that this email, in the context of everything else in this file, creates a significant legal exposure for both Dale Fitch and Richard Colton that goes well beyond property fraud." He paused. "I can tell you that I intend to make sure it gets in front of the people who have the authority to investigate it properly." He looked at him. "How long will that take?" "Longer than you want," he said honestly. "Shorter than they're hoping." He looked at the document spread on the bench. "Father built an excellent case. What you've added in the last 2 days fills the gaps he didn't have time to close." He paused. "I've been very proud of you." She almost lost it at that. The specific breaking open feeling. She felt it coming, the specific breaking open. When it produced, when it was touched, and exactly did back the way she held back everything that couldn't be useful right now. Not suppressing it, just setting it aside with the promise to herself that she would come back to it when it was safe to do so. "Spat. What do I need to do?" she said. "Let me file what I need to file tonight. And don't be alone." He looked at Ace when he said it. Ace said nothing. His expression said everything. Voss left with digital copies of everything. When he took the sealed envelope, he shook her hand at the door the same way Ace had 2 days ago. Firm, dry, lasting exactly the right amount of time. When she watched his SUV leave the lot, and then the other car arrived, the dark sedan, same one from the morning. It came down the road and it slowed, and this time it didn't stop at the edge of the lot. It came into the lot, and it parked, and a man got out who was not wearing a corporate suit or driving a van. He was wearing the kind of deliberately casual clothes that people wore when they were trying not to look like what they were, and he was holding something in his right hand that he kept close to his leg. Mo saw it first. "Emily," he said, quiet, controlled, till she was already looking. The man walked toward the shop door. In his late 30s, the particular build and movement of someone who had military or law enforcement training and had since moved into the private sector where the oversight was lighter. Stopped 10 feet from the door. "Emily Walker," he said. "It's me," she said. "Second time tonight." "You need to stop what you're doing," he said. No professional courtesy. Just the thing itself, delivered the way people delivered it when they'd been told to make an impression. "Sorry," she said. "I don't think I caught your name." "No." He didn't give it. "You've been collecting documents that don't belong to you. You've been contacting people about a private business matter. You've been creating a situation that's going to be very uncomfortable for everyone involved, including yourself." "Those documents belong to my father," she said. "And the people I've been talking to are my neighbors." "Your father is dead," the man said. His voice was flat. What he was doing died with him. You should let it stay that way. Something went very still inside her. Not fear. She had fear, it was there. A cold crawl across the back of her neck, but underneath it something else had taken weight, something her father would have recognized. When she took one step forward, out of the doorway, into the lot. "Built something," she said. "He built it carefully, with everything he had for 2 years. He didn't let people talk him out of it. Then, he wouldn't let people talk him out of it now if he were standing here. You don't, and I'm his daughter. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her at Ace and Danny and Ramos. Calculation was visible. She watched it move across his face. He took a step back. "You're making a mistake," he said. Told that before, she said. "I'm still standing here." There for another 5 seconds. Then he went back to the sedan and got in and drove out of the lot. The moment his taillights cleared the lot entrance, Ramos had his phone out, the plate. He was already dialing. Danny was next to Emily. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, because she was. Her hands were steady, and her voice was steady. And the thing that was underneath the fear had not moved. He wasn't going to do anything tonight, not with 3 witnesses. He came to look at us, and now he's going to report what he saw, Ace said. Emily said, "Let them know we're not alone." She went back inside. She picked up her phone, and she called Helen Marsh, and he said, "Helen, I need you to call to Dave and Patricia and Ben tonight. To be careful. Tell them to lock up. Don't be alone, and call me if anything feels wrong." Said, "Already on it. Dave called me an hour ago. Said he thought someone was watching his store. They might be. Calm. Stay in contact. Nothing happens tonight that we can't handle." She paused. "This is almost over." "Promise?" Helen asked, and under the word was 16 years of a woman who had built something and loved it and refused to lose it. Emily said. She hung up. She stood at the workbench with her father's notebook in front of her, open to the last entry, and she read it one more time. "Colton's connection to Meridian isn't consulting fees like I thought." She closed the notebook. She held it for a moment. She set it down flat on the bench with her palm on top of it. "Okafor gets here tomorrow morning," Danny said. He had shifted the timeline without being asked. "I called her an hour ago and moved the meeting up. Everything that happened tonight goes on record." "The man at the door," Ace said. "The plate Ramos ran. It comes back to a private security firm based in Scottsdale. They have 3 corporate clients listed publicly. Is a holding company." She looked at him. "It's the same holding company," he said. Of course it was. Of course, Meridian kept private security on retainer for exactly this kind of situation, for the moment when someone got close enough that the polished corporate approach needed a different instrument. She thought about how many times that instrument had been used before. Businessmen. She thought about the business owners who had sold without understanding the full pressure they'd been under. She thought about Carla Mendez's 20 years, and Gerald Park's auto parts store, and Helen's Tuesday coffee, and all the things that had been taken or nearly taken because one man's equity stake was more important to than the community he'd been elected to serve. She thought about what her father had tried to do alone. She picked up her wrench. Old habit. Something to hold when she was thinking. She turned it over in her hands. "When Okafor gets here," she said, "I want everyone there. A business owner who is willing to come. I want her to walk into this shop and see that this is not one woman with a file. I want her to see a community." "I'll make the calls," Ramos said. "You want Colton to find out about this from a reporter asking him for comment," Emily said. "The first time he hears her name to be when she calls him. You want him to have no time to build a version of events because the real version is already written." "We have until tomorrow morning," Danny said. "Everything in order." "Then we don't sleep," she said. Ace looked at her. She expected him to repeat what he'd said earlier about tired people and mistakes. Instead, he said, "What do you need?" She looked around the shop, the tools, the chair, the sign, the walls that still smelled like her father. About Thomas Walker. She thought about Thomas Place is the year she was born. Thought about him working in it every day for 22 years. One, fixing things that were broken in people who had nowhere else to go, and without drama, believing that the work spoke for itself and that a person didn't need to explain themselves if they were doing right by the people who came through their door. He thought about him sitting in that chair on the last night of his life, 17 months into a fight that had cost him more than he'd told anyone, knowing he was getting close and not knowing he was running out of time. He had trusted her with this, not because she was convenient, because she was the only one left, Because she was the right one. Because she was his, he was hers. And he was one, and this place was both of theirs. One, and some things were not for sale. She set the wrench down. Coffee, she said. And then let's finish this. Mo said, without missing a beat, I'll make the coffee. He worked through the night. The shop stayed lit. The first time in 14 months, the silence inside Walker's custom garage was not the silence of absence. The silence of something being built, careful and deliberate, and strong enough to hold the weight of everything that was coming next. 5. The finish line Thomas Walker never reached. Okafor arrived at 7:43 in the morning, driving a car that had clearly been on the highway since before dawn. Please. She was younger than Emily expected, early 30s, natural hair pulled back, wearing the particular practical clothes of someone who had learned that good journalism happened in places that didn't always have clean floors. He walked into Walker's custom garage and stopped just inside the door and tucked in the room without saying anything for about 10 seconds, not looking at the shop, looking at the people. Helen Marsh was there, sitting on a stool near the workbench, with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Park stood near the window, still and watchful. Mendez had driven 40 miles in the dark to get there, and was standing with her arms crossed and her chin slightly raised, the posture of someone who had been waiting a long time to be in a room like this one. Kowalski, Patricia Seo, Ben Marrero, the others. Emily had reached through the night by phone former business owners who had sold and moved away, and answered her calls at midnight anyway, because something in how she talked made them understand that the thing they'd believed was finished was not finished. People in total, plus Ace and Danny and Ramos, plus Emily herself. Okafor looked at all of it. Then she looked at Emily. You put this together overnight, she said. Most of it was already put together, Emily said. When my father did the real work, I just finished it. Set her bag down on the workbench and pulled out a recorder. She placed it on the surface and looked around the room and said, whoever wants to start, start. Park started. He talked for 6 minutes without being interrupted, in the clear, direct voice of someone who had rehearsed this in his head for months and was relieved beyond measure to finally say it out loud. He described the approach, the pressure, the big one, the manufactured decline, the sale he hadn't wanted to make. Described his conversation with Thomas Walker. He described the feeling of watching something he'd built 20 years dissolve under him while everyone around him acted like it was just business. Carla Mendez talked, then Helen, then Dave. Tig. Then the others, one by one recount, distinct in its details and identical in its shape, the same company. The same tactics. Result. The same applied to different lives with the same disregard for what those lives had built. Okafor did not react visibly to any of it. She asked precise questions, the kind that filled specific gaps, and she wrote in a small notebook with a pen she clicked twice before using and once after. Lee watched her and understood that this was what competence looked like in a different field, the same quality she recognized in herself when she was working, the absence of performance, the pure attention to the task. When the accounts were finished, Emily laid the documents on the workbench, and he walked Sarah through her father's Route 9 folder first, then the financial records from the safe, then the printed emails. When she got to the Fitch-Colton exchange, she placed it on the surface and stepped back. Read it. She read it twice. She wrote something in her notebook. The business side, I'll handle the rest. Give it 90 days, Sarah said quietly. Reading it back, feeling the weight of it. My father died 73 days after that email, Emily said. Up. Her eyes were steady, and there was something behind them that was not pity. It was the particular quality of a person who had just understood the full shape of what they were looking at and had made a decision about what they were going to do with it. It involves filing, Sarah said. What's the timeline? Last night, Danny said. Federal level. Fraud. Conflict of interest. Abuse of public office. Depending on how quickly the AG's office moves, there could be a formal inquiry open before the end of the week. She nodded. She picked up the Fitch Colton email and photographed it. Photographed every document Emily laid in front of her. It was methodical and thorough and fast. And Emily understood that fast and thorough were not usually supposed to go together, but that in the hands of someone who was very good at their work, they did. When at 9:15, Sarah closed her notebook. I need to call Richard Colton for comment before we publish, she said. Process. He gets to respond. When are you publishing? Emily asked. Fast as I can verify, independently. Some of this I can verify today. Some needs more time. She paused. But I'll tell you this, what's in this room, what you've built here is not a tip case. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I know the difference. Made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, but somewhere between the two, the sound of someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just told that someone else could finally see it too. Lee looked at her. Helen looked back. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Sarah left at 9:30. She shook Emily's hand at the door. It was strong, and she held it for a moment longer than in a purely professional handshake required. And in that extra moment, Emily understood that this woman knew what it had cost to Sylvia's room and was not taking it lightly. The gathering in the shop broke up slowly. People didn't want to leave. Noticed that the particular reluctance of people who had spent months or years feeling isolated in their experience and had just spent 2 hours discovering that they were not isolated at all. Park and Dave Kowalski exchanged phone numbers in the parking lot. Mendez hugged Helen Marsh. Patricia Seo stopped on her way out and gripped Emily's arm for a moment, without saying anything, which was its own kind of statement. 10 o'clock, it was just Emily and the three of them. And when she leaned against the workbench, she was tired in the specific way of someone who had been running on purpose and adrenaline for 36 hours and could feel the exact moment the adrenaline shifted down a gear. Her bones felt heavy. Her eyes had a sharpness behind them that was close to pain. Should sleep, Ace said. I know, she said. She didn't move. I know. She pressed her hands flat on the workbench. I keep thinking about what happens next. Colton gets ahead of it. What if Voss's filing goes somewhere and disappears? What if Meridian has enough lawyers to slow walk this for years while they keep? Stop, Ace said. Not unkindly, with the firmness of someone who has watched other people spiral and knows when to interrupt it. That could be done. More than anyone had a right to expect in the time you had. What happens next is in other people's hands now, and the worst thing you can do is try to carry their job on top of yours. He looked at him. He looked back. Your father couldn't finish it alone, he said. He was right that he needed more people. You understood that faster than he did. One, you built the room he couldn't build. That's not nothing. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she pushed herself off the bench. 4 hours, she said. Then I'm back. We'll be here, Ramos said. She drove home, took off her boots at the door, and lay down on her bed without taking off anything else. And she was asleep in under 3 minutes. It was a thing that happened when your body finally collected the debt your will had been refusing to acknowledge. She dreamed about her father, not the sharp, painful dreams that sometimes ambushed her in the months after he died, the ones where he was alive, and then suddenly wasn't, where the grief reset itself and hit fresh. This was different. He was in the shop, sitting at the workbench, writing in one of his notebooks. He didn't look up when she came in, but his posture changed the way it always had. When she walked in, a small settling, a kind of completion, it did. The body language of someone who had been waiting without admitting it. She woke up at 2:15 in the afternoon with the specific clarity of someone who had slept exactly as long as they needed to. She lay still for a moment and let the clarity settle. Then her phone rang. It was Danny. You need to come back to the shop, he said. Colton happened. She was in the truck in 4 minutes. Met her at the door. Sarah Okafor called him at 11 this morning for comment. He had 2 hours to respond. He paused. Instead of responding, he called the county sheriff's office and filed a complaint claiming that documents were stolen from a county registry filing. claiming your father's documentation was obtained illegally. She felt a surge of cold anger that she pushed back down. It's not true. We know it's not true. Voss knows it's not true. But it gave Colton a play. If he can get the original documents designated as evidence in a theft inquiry, he can potentially get them frozen from being used in any other proceeding. You do that? He can try. Voss is already responding. Danny's voice was controlled, but she could hear the edge under it. It's going to be loud. And Colton is going to use every hour he can to create noise and confusion and make this look like a political attack by. He paused, choosing the words carefully, a grieving daughter with a grudge. She stood very still. A grieving daughter with a grudge. She could hear exactly how he would say it, could picture his face, the face of a man who had been shaking hands at community events for 11 years, arranging itself into the expression of someone deeply pained by the situation. Hear the press conference in her head, the careful language, the legal framing, and the suggestion that this was all very unfortunate. He had nothing but respect for Thomas Walker's memory. The documents in question were a private matter that had been mishandled by people, Hannibal, who didn't understand the process. She thought about every business owner who had sat in her shop that morning. She thought about what Colton's play, even an unsuccessful one, could do to them. The uncertainty, the fear of being named in a legal action, the real possibility that some of them would pull back, decide the exposure wasn't worth it, go quiet again. The point, not to win, to erode. Where's Sarah Okafor right now? Emily asked. On the phone with her legal team, Danny said. What does she need from us? She needs the chain of custody on every document to be airtight. She needs to be able to demonstrate that everything your father gathered was gathered legally, stored in his own property, and passed to you as his heir. It was, Emily said. Every piece of it. Do you have anything that documents your father's ownership of the safe contents? A will? A document identifying you as his heir? She went upstairs. She went to the filing cabinet, not the insurance drawer this time, but the main one, and she found the folder labeled legal in her father's handwriting, and inside it his will. 2 pages, simple and precise like everything he did. Leaving the shop, its contents, and all business records contained therein to Emily Rose Walker. Brought it downstairs. Danny photographed it. He sent it to Voss. He sent it to Sarah Okafor. Voss called back in 12 minutes. Put him on speaker. The theft claim is a delay tactic, Voss said, with the particular calm of a man who had been watching these tactics for 30 years. It has no legal merit. The will establishes your right to everything in that shop, including the contents of the safe. The complaint will be dismissed. But Colton is buying time. He's hoping to get up ahead us to this before publication. Take that play away from him, Emily asked. We speed up the other plays, Voss said. I've been on the phone with the state AG's office this morning. Aware of Colton. For a while, he's not the only county official Meridian has relationships with, and he's not the first one they've looked at. Father's documentation does, is give them the specific connection they've been missing. He paused, moving faster than I expected. How fast? There's a conversation happening today that I'm not at liberty to describe in detail, Voss said. You to understand that this morning, Richard Colton had a lot of options. Tonight, some of those options are going to be gone. He felt something shift, not relief too early for relief, particular sensation of a structure, beginning to move in the right direction, the way you felt when a seized engine finally turned over. Resistance giving, just slightly in the right place. What do I do right now? She asked. Stay available. Talk to anyone official without me on the phone. Trust the process you built. He paused. Your father trusted it. It was the right call then. It's the right call now. He hung up. She set the phone on the workbench and looked at Ace, leaning against the wall, with his arms crossed, and an expression she'd come to recognize as his version of being completely calm while managing a significant amount of information simultaneously. Colton's going to make a public statement, Ace said, this afternoon. He'll try to get in front of the narrative, Emily said. Every statement he makes is something Sarah Okafor can fact check against what we've already given her. He might come at you directly, Danny said. Not through the security company. He might make it personal. He's been making it personal since before I knew he existed, she said. Since before my father knew he existed. The difference now is that I know his name and I have his emails. He said it without heat, without drama. Just the flat, solid fact of it, placed in the room the way her father placed evidence, because it was true and because it mattered, and because the truth, correctly, held correctly and with the right people behind it, was the strongest thing you could hold. 47 in the afternoon, Richard Colton held a press conference. Danny pulled it up on his phone and they watched it together, the four of them clustered around the small screen in the shop where Thomas Walker had worked for 22 years and was polished. He wore a dark suit, and his expression was that of a man who had been deeply wronged and was being extremely gracious about it. Spoke about community service, about his long record, about the importance of protecting the integrity of county processes from hand being weaponized for personal agendas. He used the phrase, a grieving family's misunderstanding of complex legal documents, and Emily felt Ace go still beside her with a particular quality of stillness that she was beginning to understand was his version of very controlled anger. He did not mention the emails. He did not mention his equity stake. He did not mention the holding company for 9 minutes and said nothing that addressed a single specific piece of the evidence in the safe, which told her that Voss was right. Colton had not seen the full extent of what her father had built, and the theft complaint was not about the documents being illegal. It was about him finding out what was in them. He doesn't know about the financial records, Danny said. Ace said. He knows about the Route 9 folder. He doesn't know about the safe. He's going to find out, Ramos said, as soon as Sarah publishes. Emily's phone buzzed. Okafor. Text message story goes live at 6 p.m. Has seen everything. It's going. Are you ready? He typed back. Ready. She put the phone down, picked up her father's notebook from where it had sat on the bench since last night, and she held it in both hands and she allowed herself, for the first time, since she'd opened the safe, to feel the full weight of what he had done. Not the tragedy of it, the love in it. The specific love of a man who had decided that the most important thing he could leave his daughter was not the shop or the tools or even the documentation. The example, demonstration that some things were worth fighting for, and that the fight itself, done with precision and principle, and the refusal to be rushed into giving up, was its own kind of victory even when you didn't get to see the end of it. He was getting to see the end of it. She set the notebook down. At 6 p.m. exactly, the Phoenix Tribune published Sarah Okafor's story online. The line was specific and unadorned in the way that only the most confident journalists managed. County commissioner held equity stake in development firm that targeted local businesses. Heading, documents show Richard Colton buried formal complaint against company in which he was part owner. Inside, 2 years of Thomas Walker's meticulous documentation. The financial records from the safe, the Fitch Colton emails, the accounts of 11 business owners in the Route 9 corridor, its record by name. Read it in her father's shop. She read it slowly and carefully, not because she needed to check it, but because she wanted to experience the shape of it, the shape of her father's work made public and permanent and impossible to bury, shape of the thing he had started and that she had finished, assembled into something that would outlast the silence that had almost swallowed it. The phone started ringing at 6:03. Helen Marsh, Emily. I'm reading it. I know. It's everything. All of it. I know, Helen. Your dad, Helen's voice broke and rebuilt itself in the same breath. Your dad did this. He built all of this. We did, Emily said. Gerald Park called at 6:10. His voice was thick in the way of a man who did not cry often and was managing the situation by being very focused on practicalities. The comments on the article are already there. Are people sharing it? People I don't know. From other towns. A pause. Thomas would have liked to see that, Emily said. He would have. At 6:22, Voss called. Colton's attorney reached out to my office 20 minutes ago, he said. You want to talk? She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. What does that mean? She asked. It means Richard Colton read the article and discovered the full extent of what Thomas Walker built, and he's recalibrating. Voss paused. It means what we hoped it means. And Meridian? Gail Fitch was in a meeting with federal investigators at 4 p.m. today. Fictional. I'm told the meeting is still ongoing. Another pause, and in it she could hear the careful satisfaction of a man who had been waiting a long time to say the next words. 9 acquisition plan has been suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the inquiry. Properties, no contracts, no closings. She sat down. She sat down in her father's chair, the one with the cracked armrest, and she pressed her free hand flat on the armrest, and she breathed. Properties, the diner, the hardware store, the community center, businesses that were still standing, still there, still open. Emily, Voss said, you should know something. Vincent Bonsick. I've talked to a lot of clients over 30 years who have been through exactly the kind of fight you've just been through. And I don't say this lightly. He paused. What your family built, what you finished, is exactly how this is supposed to work. It doesn't always work this way. But when it does, it's because someone refused to let it be buried. Your father refused. You refused. She couldn't speak for a moment. She managed. She hung up. She sat in the chair. Ace was standing a few feet away. He'd heard enough to understand the shape of it. He didn't say anything right away. He gave her the moment, which was the right thing to give her. For a while, she said, it's not over. The investigation will take time. The legal process will take time. Yes, he said. Still has lawyers and money and time. Yes. Like him, don't go quietly. No, he said. You go. She looked at him. How are you so sure? Because the documentation is complete. Because the journalist is credible. Because there are 11 people on record. Because the federal investigators are in the building. He paused. And because your father spent 2 years making sure that when this moment came, it would be unignorable. She thought about Thomas Walker. She thought about the specific stubbornness of a man who had built his life on the belief that doing right by people was not a strategy or a calculation, but a fundamental requirement of being a person, who had sat in this chair at the end of every day for 22 years and believed without requiring evidence that the work was worth doing. She understood. Now that he hadn't just been building a case, he'd been building her. Every conversation about doing the job right, every time he said, the work speaks for itself. Every time he didn't walk away from something because it was hard or because the odds were bad or because no one else was moving, showing her every single day what it looked like to be the kind of person who refused to let important things be lost. She had learned it so completely that she'd done it without knowing she was doing it. She grabbed a chain in a gas station parking lot. She'd called strangers in the middle of the night and convinced them to come to a shop they'd never been to and say things on record that took courage to say. She'd stood in her own doorway and told a man who was trying to intimidate her that she was still standing here. She had done all of it the same way her father had done everything, not because she was certain it would work, but because it was the right thing to do. And some things didn't require the outcome to be guaranteed before the effort was made. She stood up from the chair. She looked at Ace and Danny and Ramos, 3 men who had walked into her life 4 days ago because one of them had been on the ground in a gas station parking lot and she decided not to keep walking. She said she meant it to reach all 3 of them, and she saw it land. Ramos nodded. One motion, heavy and complete. Danny said, your father was doing the right thing. That's all this ever was. Ace looked at her for a long moment with those deep water eyes that she had been reading for 4 days and was only beginning to understand how to interpret fully. He said, don't thank us. We came because of what you did in a parking lot. After that, you did. She held his gaze. I guess we did it together, she said. Yeah, he said, you did. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing like this ever is. The investigation moved at the pace of large legal machinery, which is to say it moved with the grinding deliberateness of something that could not be rushed without breaking. Days when Emily read the news and felt the familiar cold crawl of doubt, the worry that money and lawyers and political connections would find some way to slow walk the whole thing into exhaustion. Days when she sat in the chair and talked to her father the way she never had. She never had when he was alive, because that the time for those conversations was shorter than you believed when you had them. Story stayed in the air. Sarah Okafor followed it methodically, publishing follow-up pieces as the investigation produced results. Journalists picked it up. 3 other Route 9 business owners who had sold came forward publicly after reading the initial article. A second county official was identified with connections to Meridian Pacific. Fitch, who had written the email that ended with "Give it 90 days," accepted a cooperation agreement with federal investigators in exchange for testimony. Richard Colton resigned from the county commission in month 3 of the investigation. His resignation statement was 4 sentences long and said nothing. He read it at the workbench alone early in the morning before she opened the shop. Twice. She didn't feel triumph. That wasn't the right word for what she felt. Closer to completion. The specific sensation of a thing that had been unfinished for a long time finally being finished. The particular quiet of a machine that has been running wrong for too long, finally settling into the right rhythm. Put the phone down. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the shop. Months since the story broke, things had changed. Not all at once, real change. Never happened all at once, but steadily, the way a tide came in. Account that had canceled came back. Note, not the original manager, he'd been replaced, but the new one had called and apologized and said they'd had a look at what happened and understood now that their previous information had been bad. Your company owner had called personally. He'd sounded like a man who had been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time and was relieved to put it down. New customers came, some of them because of the article, because Sarah Okafor had written about the shop by name and described what it was, not just a business, but a legacy, the thing Thomas Walker had built and that his daughter had refused to let be taken. People came from other towns, riders she'd never met, pulled into the lot and said they'd heard about her from someone who'd heard about her from someone. She worked harder than she'd ever worked, and it was not the desperate hard work of someone trying to keep something alive. The good kind, the kind her father had always said was its own reward. She hired 2 mechanics in month 4. A young man named Carlos, who was 22 and had been teaching himself out of books, which she recognized immediately as her own origin story. A woman named Joe, who was 38, and had been the best mechanic at a dealership across town that had treated her like a liability for 8 years. Both started on a Monday, and by Wednesday, Emily understood that she had made 2 excellent decisions. The same way she understood when a repair was right, not because someone told her, because the machine ran, and the sound was clean, and nothing was fighting anything it shouldn't be fighting. Of the Hell's Angels came back to the shop, not all at once, not in ways that announced selves, but regularly. Ace came in on a Tuesday 6 weeks, after everything broke, and brought his motorcycle for a full service, and sat in the shop and drank coffee while she worked, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with Pacific or Richard Colton or the investigation. It's about engines. They talked about what it meant to build something and whether the building was more important than what got built. Mouse came in with a 1,081 shovelhead that needed more attention than either of them initially admitted. And he and Emily spent 4 hours on it on a Saturday. And at the end of it, the thing ran like it had been manufactured yesterday. Mouse looked at her with an expression she understood perfectly. He said, "I know," she said. Danny Croft came in once with a problem. She took exactly 17 minutes to diagnose and 4 hours to fix. She was done. He looked at the repair and then at her and said the same thing he'd said in the shop the morning after the gas station, the one who stood up. He understood now what he'd meant by it. Nostit. Not just the chain in the parking lot. Love it. The decision that ran underneath every other decision, the fundamental refusal to walk away from something that mattered, because walking away was easier. It's not a one-time thing. It was a character trait, the kind that gets tested over and over, and either holds or doesn't, and in holding becomes the truest thing about you. Our custom garage was busier than it had ever been. Lee Walker was exactly where she was supposed to be. Miss Walker, who had built the place from nothing the year his daughter was born, and had spent the last 2 years of his life making sure that what he built would still be standing when he couldn't stand in it anymore. Walker had not been wrong about a single thing. About the work, not about the fight, and not about his daughter. Morning, after Colton's resignation, Emily arrived at the shop before anyone else. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, started the coffee. She stood in the middle of the shop and she listened to the particular quiet of it. The quiet that was not silence, but texture and memory, and the weight of every day that had happened inside these walls. She crossed to the workbench. She picked up a wrench. She turned it over in her hands once. Anyway, she'd turned it every day since she was 9 years old. When the same motion her father had made thousands of times. Listen, the motion that meant there's work to do. And I am the one to do it. She set it back down. She sat in the chair with the cracked armrest in the particular way her father had sat in it, not defeated by it, not heavy in it, but settled away settled into the right place for them at the right time in their life. She thought about 5 seconds in a gas station parking lot. She thought about a heavy chain and 6 men and 1 decision. She thought about everything that had come from it, the safe documents, the documents full of people, the story that went out at 6 p.m. and would not be taken back, and the investigation, resignation, some one, the shop that was still standing. She thought about her father. Then she stopped thinking and just sat in the shop he had built and that she had saved, when in the town that had found its voice. Because one person had decided not to be quiet. It was exactly and completely and permanently where she needed to be. Some things in this world cannot be bought. Some things cannot be taken, no matter how much money stands behind the taking. Some things are built by people who understand that the work itself is the point, that doing it right, doing it with honesty and precision, and the refusal to walk away is not a strategy for some other outcome. It's the outcome. Walker's custom garage was built by a man who believed that, saved by a woman who was his daughter in every way that mattered. Stand there on Route 9 in Redwood Valley, Arizona, east, as long as someone who understood that truth was willing to open the door every morning. Then turn on the lights, get the coffee, make one elbow, pick up the tools, begin.